everyone and welcome back to the Colour Cave, where we like to play with art stuff. Today's video was suggested by Colouring with D, and it's something that I had been thinking about doing, but I didn't really know whether it was relevant information for you. There are quite a lot of videos already on YouTube surrounding blending, and I felt that I maybe had to take a bit more of an objective approach with this. What we're going to discuss today is the different types of blending mediums and tools available, and we're going to have a little swatch out at them, and also a quick note on burnishing and burnisher pencils as well. So I'm just going to gather everything together and we can get going. Just before I start explaining some of the tools that are in front of me here, I just want to talk a little bit about the difference between blending and burnishing. Now, the definition of burnishing is to polish or smooth something or to make it shiny. And when we talk about blending in a colouring sense, we talk about merging colours together. And the two sometimes get confused, and I think it is because when you are burnishing, it's quite often the same process as when you're blending. And what I mean by that is when you blend your colour pencil out, quite often you inadvertently end up burnishing anyway. And that is in that you flatten the tooth of the paper and it makes it look shiny. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail, but I just wanted to sort of clarify that. So really, when you're thinking about burnishing, you're not thinking about mixing colours together, you're just thinking about smoothing out what you've coloured. Whereas when we're blending, primarily we are thinking about pushing those colours together and softening the edges to make it seamless across the part that you have coloured. So, different ways that you can blend. There are a myriad of ways you can do that, as you can see by what's in front of me. I would say probably the most common method is to use a colourless blending pencil, and I have two here. Now, the idea behind these is that they have the same makeup as a coloured pencil, but it's just minus the pigment. I have the Prismacolor one here, and I also have the Derwent Blender pencil too. Now, what I tend to find is that the Prismacolor blender behaves really well, obviously, with Prismacolor pencils, and it also works quite well with some other wax-based pencils. It is a case of trial and error, particularly with the lesser known brands of pencil, but one of these will set you back maybe a couple of pounds or a couple of dollars, so it's quite a handy thing to have. And basically this one is quite soft like the Prismacolor pencils, so it's nice and easy to work with. The Derwent Blender, I actually use this with polychromos pencils and it behaves quite well. Now, polychromos pencils are oil-based pencils, and I have found that the Derwent Blender tends to play quite nicely with oil-based pencils, so that's why I have two different colourless blender pencils. What I will say about using blender pencils is that they can be quite hard on your hands and can be quite hard on your grip because you do have to press quite hard with them. So that's a downside to them, although they are cheap and quite easily accessible. If you have any sort of grip issues or problems with your hands, if you try to blend with them for long periods of time, you might get a bit crampy. So the other thing that I have here in pencil form is the Derwent Burnisher. Now, there was quite a lot of debate over this in the last scroller box because one of these came in the scroller box. I'll put a link in the card and in the description down below as well. If you want to go and check that video out later, you can do. The Burnisher is basically a hard tipped version of the blender, and the behaviour between these two is basically that you will be able to smoosh your colours together with this one, whereas if you use the burnisher it won't do as good a job. It will still mix the colour a little bit, but not an awful lot. This is designed for polishing, that's why it's shiny and that's why it's silver. Basically a wet sponge, and the sponge is soaked with this blending medium, and what that allows you to do is make less mess, especially if you have young children or that kind of thing. Animals in my case. And what you can do is you can unscrew the lid of this, and you can smell it straight away. I don't know why I had to hold it up to my nose to do that. I know it smells. But what this lets you do is you can take your cotton bud and you can press it into the sponge Or you can use this, which is a blending stump. Now, a blending stump and a tortillon are basically the same thing. They're usually made of paper or card that's been rolled up and packed together. And you can do the same thing, and you can press this into the sponge and it'll soak the end, and then you can use it to blend your work. So this is a really tidy and convenient way of blending if you perhaps don't like the blender pencils or the markers. So there's lots of different options for blending, and we're going to test them out right now. This is actually craft paper, but it's got a bit of a tooth on it and I quite like it for colouring. So I've just split this off into sections. We're going to take a look at all the different types of blending methods, and we're going to do it for a wax-based pencil and also an oil-based pencil. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to colour down in the middle here, and I'm going to either burnish or blend the left hand side of each scribble, if you like, so that you can see the difference between the different types of blending mediums. The first thing you can see is wax-based pencils. So my wax-based pencils are going to be Prismacolors because they are nice and easy to blend, and it's going to be nice and easy to show you. I've picked these colours just because they come up well in the camera. When you're having two colours together, you're going to want them in a gradient anyway, so you're going to use this technique of sort of merging them together. And when you are using blending pencils, or in this particular case a burnisher, the more layers of pencil you have down on the paper, the better, because what it's doing is it's kind of smooshing it into the paper, and it's quite a physical process. As I said, it's quite hard on your hands. So if you start with a gradient, so if you start with your darkest part here and you start to lighten it up, this is like a mini tutorial on gradients, and you take your darker colour or your other colour, it doesn't necessarily have to be darker, and if you start light somewhere in here, and then as you bring it down, start to press a bit harder. Now, because we're working with a pencil, now this is going to be the burnisher, we want to make sure we've got plenty of layers of pencil down on the paper. I'm only going to explain this once. When I go to do this for the rest of the tools, I will speed this part up because I don't want to bore the pants off you. So there we go. I've got a good couple of layers down on the paper. So there's plenty of pencil on the paper. You can actually see the mark in my cutting mat from in behind. That's very unprofessional. Okay, so you've got there your two colours, and you think, right, okay, I want to blend these together, or in this case, we want to burnish them. Now you can clearly see the tooth of the paper. That is very, very obvious. Now what I'm going to do here is I am just going to start. Now the motion that you want to use is small circular motions, really tight little circles. And you want to press hard. Now you'll be able to see very, very quickly that it is taking away that graininess and the tooth of the paper, and that is what a burnisher is designed to do. So I'm just going to keep going. You have to be patient with this as well. Okay, so now I'm down into the part where the colours are transitioning, and already it's starting to look quite muddy. And when you do this, you will be able to feel the movement under your hand, and you'll be able to see whether the pigment is moving about or not. And with the burnisher, it's not moving that much. And again, it's not supposed to with a burnisher. So you can see there is a world of difference between the straight pencil and having that burnished. Now if you look closely at the transition area between the pink and the violet, it's kind of muddy, and it's actually blended out not too bad with this burnisher, but it's not given a nice smooth transition. It looks kind of scratchy in the middle there, and that's because this really isn't designed for smooshing colour together. So that is the burnisher. Okay, so now we have our next gradient, and what we want to do is take the Colorless blender. And the one thing that you have to be aware of with these, again, because it's soft and you're going to be blending colours together, is pigment will build up, and you can just see there's a tiny bit of green on mine from the last time I used it. You don't want it to contaminate all your beautiful efforts colouring. What you want to do is you want to take a blank piece of paper, just a scrap piece of paper, and you want to flick the point over the paper but turn it at the same time in a sort of twisty, flicky type motion like this, and that will take the pigment off the end so that it's nice and clean. So I'm just going to do the same thing again, and the same method, just those tight little circular motions. Now what I do find with blender pencils is that they tend to lighten up the colour of your coloured pencil, so that is something to bear in mind if you're planning on using a blending pencil, is that it may look slightly lighter than your original colouring. Now when I get down in here into the area, the transition area between the two colours, you can see that that is much more even and much smoother than with the burnisher. Now what's happening here is obviously these colours are mixing together and it is starting to show on the point of my pencil. So again, I'm just going to flick that and clean it off just very quickly, because I want this purple to stay very purple. That's not very technical, is it? So there is a much more gradual transition between the pink and the purple, but at the same time it has blended out all those little white patches, not dissimilar to the burnisher pencil. But you can see that the colour is much more even where that crossover is, and if you zoom out a little bit you can see that it gives you a much smoother transition from one colour to the next. And you don't have the same scratchiness in this middle part. When using burnishers and blender pencils, they are the last thing that you do to your picture. So you do all of your colouring first, and then you do your blending. Now the reason for that is both of these methods damage the tooth of your paper, and because you have that smoothness on the paper, essentially you've squashed the tooth down on the paper and it won't pick up any more of your pencil. When you colour across paper with a pencil, it's that sort of toothiness of the paper that actually grips the pencil and takes the pigment. So if you've squashed that and smoothed it out, you will find it very difficult to put down any more pencil after that point. Okay, so the next one we have is the Blender marker, which as I said was the Prismacolor one. So it is designed to use with Prismacolor pencils, and this has two different nibs on it, and the caps are really tight on these. There is a nice little bullet nib, which is good for getting into little tight spaces, and on the other end is a rather chunky chisel nib, which I tried out and I just feel it's a little bit clumsy to use, so I'm going to show you with the dainty little bullet nib. So again, the same principle. Now the thing about using a liquid blending medium is that you can use it in between layers of colour, because you're physically not pushing down the tooth of the paper. Then that gives you the option to let it dry and you can go back and put more pencil in. So you don't need to use any sort of pressure at all. I'm just letting this run across the paper of its own accord here, and you can see it's doing a beautiful job of just smoothing that out. Now as we get into this transition area, you will see that it does a reasonably good job of blending these two colours together, and it gives you quite a smooth changeover. You're never going to get a completely seamless changeover because you're using two different colours. You do have to be realistic. But the liquid that is in these, all it does is it breaks down the binders in the pencil so that you can move the pigment about. That's the sort of unscientific description of it. And once again, you can see there that has done a really nice job of merging those two together with quite a soft outcome. And you can see as well that it's actually really similar to what happened with the Prismacolor blender pencil. So it actually matches up quite well. And again, the same thing will happen. You'll get a little bit of colour on the tip of your pen. So if you've got a scrap bit of paper, you can just clean that off until it runs clear again. You can see there's a tiny bit come off there, and that's you're ready to go for next time, and that's a really good habit to get into. Okay, so next thing we want to do is use our homemade blending pen, which as I say is an empty Copic. Don't try this with a Copic that's had ink in it before. You can buy blank Copic markers on Amazon. I think I paid about £4 or £5 for this. It might have been slightly more. But this is loaded up with some of this Zest blender. It's quite important that you don't overfill it. It's better to underfill it, because if you overfill it, it will leak. And off we go. And this is the same idea. This is a chisel nib on it, and it's slightly daintier than the Prismacolor one, and my other end has a little bullet nib on it as well, and you can see it's well used. You can get different types of Copic markers. A Copic Sketch has got a brush marker on it, so you could try something like that as well if you were feeling adventurous. So the nice thing about using these blending markers is they are really easy on your hands and your wrist joints and everything like that, because you, as I said before, you don't have to press down. But I'm just working my way in here. And you can see that colour sliding up, no problem. And while it's still wet, you can manoeuvre it about, you can manipulate it. So you can see there, just by going in little circular motions, I can actually pull the purple further up. If you don't want your dark colour to contaminate your light colour, then you can clean off your marker before you get too far into your darker colour, just before you carry on. So again, there you can see that's done quite a nice job of transitioning between the colours. Just cleaning my nib off here. Now, as I mentioned, the good thing about this is once these types of blending mediums are dry, you can actually go back over with more coloured pencil because you haven't damaged that tooth. So I'm just going to show you here with this red colour. You can see it's actually taken more pencil. So if you decide you don't have enough layers of pencil down, then you can always go back in. When you're using markers, the difference between that and using a blender pencil is that you only have to have a very small amount of colour for the markers to actually function. Whereas if you only have a very, very light layer with the blender pencils, you'll end up with a lot of really pale sort of gappy parts and you can't go back and fix it. So it's important that you've got all your layers down with the pencil, but you can go back over when you're using a blending medium that's in these markers. So you can see now that that looks quite rich, and I can do the same over here now that this is dry, and it says taking more pencil, no problem. That's actually turned out a really nice smooth transition. I'm quite pleased with that. Okay, so I'm going to show you now with the Zest blending sponge and the Stump. So this is a Kohinoor blending stump. You can get these really cheap. The quality doesn't vary that much. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to poke it in here, and if I start turning it over, you'll see it's starting to look a bit damp on the top there. So this is what we want. We want to soak the end, and most of the tortillions are this or stumps are this kind of colour, so you'll be able to see when it's soaked because it'll be a little bit darker. And off we go. And it's exactly the same thing. Here I come further down. Now I don't know if the camera's picking up, but there's a significant lightening of the pigment with this medium like this. It is a lot lighter. You can probably see it best in the purple area. It is a lot lighter than the original pencil colour. So there we are, I'm just going really over that. And there you go, very smooth, very nice. It's covered up some of the tooth of the paper as well, but again, we should be able to go back over that if you haven't pressed too hard with your stump. Okay, so now we're on to the method that I would use to blend, and that is just to use the coloured pencils themselves. And really all I do there is exactly what I've been doing before. And all I do is I continue to build the layers up of each pencil. And I start to go in this circular motion. So you can see there I'm getting to the burnishing stage because all of the tooth of the paper is disappearing. And as I work up towards my other colour, I lighten up the pressure with my hand and I start going in these circular motions until I'm not pressing on the paper at all. And then just alternate between, obviously it depends on the size of the area that you're working in. Usually when you're doing this, you're working in small areas. I'm thinking more of like if you're colouring in things like leaves or parts of, you know, body armour or hair or skin. So there we go, you can do it that way as well. And you can see that the smoothness is the sort of similar result to some of the other blending methods as well. So that's another option for you. It depends on preference really, that's what it's down to. The final one that we have is the cotton bud. And normally if I'm using a cotton bud, I just dip it straight into the bottle, and that's why I wanted to show you this, because I'm not going to use a sponge for this one. So back with this one again, I'll only do half of this just because it's very easy to define the place where I want to start and stop the blend. And again, you don't have to have a lot of pigment down on the paper for this. and you can go back over it because we're back to using a blending solution. So I've just dipped that in there. Make sure it's not dripping. And again, you don't have to use any pressure for this. Unlike blending with your pencils, you're back to more of the marker situation. And what I do find is using a cotton bud, you can control the amount of medium that you're actually using. So that I've soaked that pretty well. But you can see how gently one colour goes into another. And what I was saying earlier was sometimes you will get these white patches showing through if you have not very much pencil and a lot of blending solution, which is exactly what's happened here, and I've done it on purpose to show you. So what happens is though, once that dries, we can go back over it and we can blend it out with our cotton bud again. So you can repeat that process quite a few times. So we're going to leave that to dry just now, and while it's drying I'm going to come down here and we're going to start with the oil-based pencils. Okay, so let's take the burnisher. Just clean off the end, make sure there's nothing stuck on it. I'm actually pressing so hard it's shaking the camera. Okay, so that doesn't look very spectacular, and it's kind of pale in the middle as well. And apart from the fact, I can see that the paper's shiny. So, you know, I have burnished, but I'm not really that impressed, to be honest. Let's try with the blender pencil. So I'm switching to the Derwent Blender here because these pencils are oil-based and it just behaves a little bit better. So there you are, you have that nice transition from your pink into your purple again, and it's a lot more even where the line actually is for the split between the purple and the pink. That transition area in the middle is just a lot nicer and tidier, whereas here it just seemed to sort of disappear. So this one, I don't know how this is going to go because I haven't tried the Prismacolor blender pen with polychromos pencils, so we're going to learn together on this one. So again, you can see there is a definite line there, although I have overlapped the colours, there is a definite line between the two different colours. I was just looking to see if there's anything to tell you which end is which, but it's denoted by this stripe. So the thick stripe means the chunky chisel tip and the thin line means the bullet tip. So let's see how this goes. I'm quite interested to find out. Okay. Yeah, this is good. Okay, that went without a hitch, there we go. So just for your records, the Prismacolor blender marker works fine with polychromos pencils. So that's quite interesting as well. And the colour looks quite a bit richer. Again, back to what I was saying about using traditional blending pencils, they do tend to lighten your colours, and you can see that quite significantly between the two. Although the pressure that I've used on the pencils it's not identical, but it's very, very similar. And this, especially in the purple, I think it's very obvious in the purple, it's much richer. Okay, so on to our marker that is filled with Zest. And off we go. And there you have it. The Zest, it doesn't seem to take as well to the polychromos pencils as it does to the Prismacolors. If I just show you up the top there, there's quite a difference between the two. So on to our blending medium that is soaked in the sponge, and that means we're going to use a blending stump. Okay. This is a much more economical use of your blending medium. Because it's made of paper, it doesn't soak up the medium as readily as your cotton bud will, for obvious reasons, because cotton's designed to be super absorbent. The thing I like about the blending stump is you've got quite a lot of control over moving the pigment about, which I just don't feel that you get with some of the other things. And as I say, it's actually a happy medium between pressing down with a colourless blender and, you know, using the markers as well. It's a nice sort of middle ground. Okay, so if I'm just going to use the coloured pencils on my own, polychromos pencils in particular they're really good for layering. They layer really well. They're not as soft as Prismacolor pencils, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware by now, but I find them really nice to work with. I really like them. And you can just build up lots of light layers with them. And finally, with our cotton bud and our bottle of blending medium. So that's me, I've just dipped it in, and I'm kind of running off the excess just by squeezing it gently against the side of the neck. It does smell fabulous, this stuff. Speaking of smells, that's one of the things I will say is that the Prismacolor blender marker's pretty whiffy. It smells quite strongly of, you know, a sort of alcohol-based smell. It's not very pleasant at all. And if, like me, you suffer from a lot of sore heads, I wouldn't advise it. Now, that was me just tickling it. I hardly touched that there, and it's just smooshed together beautifully. If I come back up to the top one here, that's dry now. And you can tell because it will discolour the paper slightly when it's wet. And as it dries, see if I hold it up to the light, you can see where I've used it. And it does take time to dry, but you get to a point and you can feel it's dry enough on the top layer. Now, as I was saying, you can go back over this because all we've done is broken down the pigment. We haven't actually hurt the tooth of the paper. So you can go back over that again, and if you feel the need to blend it out again, then you can go ahead and do it. But it just gives you a really lovely finish. You know, if you like those sort of very flat, vibrant colours, it'll let you keep the richness of the colour as well. Okay, so there you have it. I hope that has made things a little bit clearer in terms of ways to blend and what items you can use to blend. The last thing I want to do is just talk a little bit about types of paper and what might be suited to which paper. With a medium tooth like this that takes coloured pencil reasonably well, you can see that the world is your oyster. You have a myriad of options here, and for that I would say that it's really down to preference. Personally, I like to blend just with coloured pencils themselves. I will use a colourless blender sometimes, but I very rarely take it to the burnishing stage. I like a little bit of texture in my colouring, so it's not something I personally use, but it is very, very handy, especially if you're colouring things that are metal or very smooth surfaces. If you have paper that is very heavily textured, i.e. it has quite a deep tooth to it. A prime example of that is books that have been self-published on Amazon, and they're published on what's called Create Space paper, and Create Space paper is very, very toothy. When you're using that type of paper, if you want to blend, I would go with one of the liquid blending mediums. You will find it very, very difficult to blend with a colourless blender without your hand falling off, because the paper is really, really rough. You shouldn't be put off from colouring in these books because you have an easy method. You can use any one of these and you'll get on a lot better. And I'm just going to show you an example of that. So the first one I have here is a colouring book by Bennett Klein, and it's called Colour My Sketchbook Epic, and this is printed on Create Space paper. It does tell you on the back here, it says printed in Great Britain by Amazon. So we know that it's been printed by Amazon. This is Create Space paper. You can feel, I mean, it is pretty obviously. Even if you run your hand over it, you can feel that it's quite rough paper. You know, it's yeah. Some people are really put off by it, which I think is such a shame. I really, really do. But I just wanted to show you an example of what happens when you run a pencil over the paper. So I'm just going to do it very lightly here. So I'm going to do it with a Polychromos, which is a slightly harder pencil, and I'm going to do it with a Prismacolor. Okay, now if I just zoom in on this, you can see how textured the paper is. It is very, very textured. And for this type of paper, the best thing to do, as I said, is to use a liquid blending medium. Another book that's very similar in the texture of the paper is this one. This is Colin Thompson's colouring book, and I absolutely love this colouring book. But if I show you some of the parts that I have coloured already, I've started on this. It's a very busy colouring book. If I zoom in, you can see how grainy the texture is on the paper. This is very, very toothy paper also, and again, if you run your hand over it, you can feel it. I have blended already with a blending medium, and I used this Copic marker, which was full of the Zest, and it is still very textured. So you are going to get varying results on varying types of paper. You will have a really easy job. The smoother the paper, the easier it is to blend, and a lot of the colouring books have got a little bit of tooth, but not too much, and those are the ones that you'll get on best with using the blender pencils. Alright, you can see how grainy the texture is on the paper. This is very, very toothy paper also, and again, if you run your hand over it, you can feel it. I have blended already with a blending medium, and I used this Copic marker, which was full of the Zest, and it is still very textured. So you are going to get varying results on varying types of paper. You will have a really easy job. The smoother the paper, the easier it is to blend, and a lot of the colouring books have got a little bit of tooth, but not too much, and those are the ones that you'll get on best with using the Blender pencils. Alright guys, I hope that has helped and has given you a bit of an insight into the different ways that you can blend. If you've got any questions or you want any more information, you can drop me a little note down in the comments and I'll be sure to pick it up because I do read my comments all the time. If you have found this helpful, it would be great if you could give this video a thumbs up and help us out, and we shall see you back in the cave for another video very soon. Bye guys!